Hello everyone. Welcome back to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst. In today's discussion, we will cover 5 important topics as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your larger understanding of the current affairs. The topics are as follows. We will begin our discussion by analyzing the recent issue of rising unemployment in our country and the causes behind it. Then, we will study in detail about the tropical cyclones and the emerging need of a new category of classification for them. After that, we will read about the KUNMING Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and its impact on the indigenous communities. Then, we will have a brief overlook about India's election journey from the Vedic age to the year of 1920 when the direct elections were introduced for the first time. And finally, we will study about what is the anticipatory bail often seen in the news. The handout for the discussion will be available in the description of the video for your effective revision. So, let's begin. The recently released India Employment Report 2024 has analyzed the trends of India's labor market for the last 2 decades and has listed the emerging challenges associated with employment in our country. These issues forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of the issues related to the growth and development. So let's first try to understand the key findings of the India Employment Report of 2024, which has been released by the Institute of Human Development and International Labour Organization. According to which, the population of the working age proportion, that is 15 to 59 years, has significantly increased from 61% in 2011 to 64% in 2021. And it is expected to further increase up to 65% by the year of 2036, thus providing our country with a rich demographic dividend. However, there lies certain leukemias as highlighted by the report. According to the report, the proportion of youth who is getting quality education has actually increased from being 18% in 2000 to 35% in 2022. But at the same time, this proportion of youth involved in economic activities has significantly declined from 52% in 2000 to 37% in 2022. At the same time, this proportion of youth among the total unemployed people in our country stands currently at 65%, which has increased from the 54% 2 decades back. Also, the labor force participation rate for women currently in our country stands at 21%, which means that out of 100 women who are in the working age of the population, only 21 of them actually gets employed. And that is almost 3 times lower than the percentage for the man, which is at 61%, thus highlighting the issue of gender divide. At the same time, the report also highlights the persisting issue of unemployment, especially among the educated youth of our country, thus becoming a grave concern for our future economic growth. So let's try to understand that what are the causes of unemployment in our country. The first and foremost is the rapid population growth which we have witnessed in the recent decades. As according to the United Nations, we have become the world's most populous country with more than 140 crore people. And thus, as the report has suggested, that while there are 7 to 8 million people who join the workforce every year, the number of non-farm jobs being created stands at a meager low of 2 to 3 million jobs a year. At the same time, there is poor quality of education in our country, which hampers the skill level which is required for the modern day jobs. As per the UDC report of 2021, there is lack of quality education infrastructure in our country, especially in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, where we face problems such as lack of schools, poor quality of education, lack of any uniform curriculum, or high teacher to pupil ratio, as well as issues of proxy teachers which are prevalent in states such as Jharkhand and Odisha. All this eventually leads to the lack of skill development. And this poor quality of education is also caused by the vicious cycle of poverty, where as per the United Nations Multidimensional Poverty Index, there are more than 23 crore people in our country who are multidimensionally poor, and thus they lack to provide their children ample amount of nutrition, which ultimately leads to their poor health, and finally the low quality of education to which they are exposed to. Then they develop a poor human capital, which eventually leads to poor work opportunities for their future, and thus they live a low standard of life, which again leads to low income and low assets. And this cycle of poverty continues generation after generation, ultimately leading to the low level of skill which exists in our country, as highlighted by the report itself, that India has a low share of technically qualified youth, where according to the report only 15% of the youth had access to any kind of vocational training. And even among these 15%, only 4% of them had access to formal level of training which is required to perform any specific job. Such low level of skill also exists because there has been rise of modern day technologies such as artificial intelligence, big data analytics, machine learning, etc. with the advent of Industry 4.0, which has led to a huge skill supply versus the demand mismatch. For example, let's say you spent years of your youth learning languages such as Java and C++. But by the time you reach to the job stage, you realize that all of these jobs can be automated by the use of artificial intelligence. Now the companies are hiring the people who are skilled in such modern day technologies such as artificial intelligence, and this is the skill which you does not have any expertise in, and thus you are rendered jobless. Then there is also the prevalence of cyclical unemployment, which is caused because of the decline in the demands for goods and services. This has happened specifically in the recent past because of the decline in propensity to consume, which has basically led to subdued demand among the consumers. Thus, if consumers are not demanding for products, the industries will stop making them, and thus they will require less workforce, and thus there will increase the unemployment. And such subdued demand has taken place because of high inflation, which currently stands at 5% as per the consumer price index combined. Also because of the K-shaped recovery which is being faced by our Indian economy, where several sectors such as tourism, textile, etc. have not been able to recover after the global shutdown caused by the pandemic. Then there are global supply chain disruptions which has been caused because of the protectionist trade policies of several countries, as well as geopolitical events such as Russia-Ukraine war. Also, there is the rising issue of jobless growth, where on one hand our economy is growing at 7 to 8% of GDP a year, but at the same time, as we can see from the report, there is persisting unemployment in our country. Various economic experts contribute this jobless growth to a major cause, and that was bypassing from the primary sector, that is agriculture, and jumping to the tertiary sector or services led growth, thus bypassing the labor intensive manufacturing sector. For example, even though this service sector contributes to the 50% of our GDP, it only employs 30% of our workforce. Then all these issues has led to the swelling of the informal sector, where currently the 90% of our workforce is employed in this informal sector, such as opening a kirana shop, opening a tea stall, street vendors, construction workers, etc. And all of these informal sector falls outside the ambit of any social security net. Thus, according to ILO, even if the job is provided, those jobs are of low productivity and low earning jobs, thus leading to frictional unemployment, where the educated youth who has been exposed to several kind of degrees, they do not want to do such meager jobs, which is also highlighted from the satire, where it states that 450 million Indians are not even looking for the jobs as per the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. Now, this low productivity and low earning jobs lead to the issues such as disguised unemployment in agriculture or poverty of aspiration, as recently highlighted by the Chief Economic Advisor to our Prime Minister, Sanjeev Sanyal, who said that there is a large section of youth who is spending years of their life not taking any job, thus waiting for an idle government sector job. Also, even if the job exists or there is a formal sector, there are lack of formal jobs due to several reasons. The first and foremost is the policy of lapsing of 33% of the jobs after the retirement, then non-filling of vacancies, and in the recent years we have also seen the inclination towards contractual based jobs such as gig economy jobs, as well as the reliance on job consultancies. For example, we can see the fair melas being organized across the country. Thus, as per the constitutional directive under Article 39 of the Constitution, which direct the state to provide for public assistance in the case of high unemployment, the government has taken several steps. The first and foremost is to increase the education level of our country. So, as per the Right to Education Act of 2009, it provides for free education for children up to 14 years of age. Then recently, the government has introduced a value-based education system under the National Education Policy of 2020, where the government is providing for vocational training for specific jobs that can be acquired in the future. Also, there is a Sarv Saksharta Abhiyan to create the literacy rate, especially among the rural people. At the same time, the Niti Aayog has launched the Atal Innovation Mission to infuse the scientific principles in the young minds of our country. The government has also taken several steps for the skilling of the youth, such as Kaushal Vikas Yojana, where the industry required skills are being infused among the youth, and as per the Kaushal Vikas Yojana report, around 1.28 crore youths have been trained by the year of 2021. And there is also a placement linked program where almost 56% out of the total certified people have been linked to the employment. Rural self-employment training institutions as well as National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme, where the government share the 25% share of stipends with the employers. The government has also taken several innovative steps for the job creation in our country, such as in the budget 2024, the government has increased the capital expenditure by 33%. At the same time, there is the production linked incentive scheme, which provides for employment in 14 labor intensive sectors such as textiles, steel, etc. Also, the government has launched Urban Infrastructure Development Fund for the creation of infrastructure in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. Then there is Government Procurement Portal, where the government procures the local products from the local artisans and tribal peoples. At the same time, the government has provided incentives and financial loans under Mudra Yojana to promote the startup culture in our country. Then, a similar kind of incentive is PM Swanidhi for the street vendors to provide them collateral-free loans. Also, to generate the employment in the rural areas, there is MG Narega scheme, which provides for 100 days of guaranteed manual work. Also, the government is trying to generate employment in various kind of sunrise sectors under the PM Employment Generation Program. As we can see that from these efforts such as PLI scheme, the government is targeting to generate around 3 lakh direct and 9 lakh indirect jobs, specifically in the sunrise sectors such as mobile phone and electronic components manufacturing. As per the report, there are several steps which the government can take. And those steps are first and foremost to promote the startup culture among the rural youth. On which line the government has launched the Agriculture Accelerator Fund in the budget of 2023, where we are encouraging the agricultural startups by the young entrepreneurs in the rural areas. Also, the report suggests that we should put impetus on sunrise sector such as manufacturing for the renewable energy components such as photovoltaic cells. Also, we can put impetus on upcoming sectors such as animation, videography, comics, gaming, etc., which is also likable with the Gen Z. Also, the government should try to faster roll the 5G services, specifically in the rural areas, to bring them under the ambit of Digital India and decline the digital divide which persists in our country. Then the government shall also aim for the decentralization of micro, small and macro industries to provide them with autonomous functioning and to create independent functions and launch several new products which are more suitable for the local needs. Then the government shall also strive to boost the women participation in the labor workforce. The report has also suggested that government shall try to create more non-farm jobs as well as to increase the skill level among the youth. With these noble suggestions, we move forward to the next news of the day. As per a recent research, the intensification of tropical cyclones due to the effect of global warming has led to the rising need of a new classification category for the tropical cyclones. These tropical cyclones forms an important component of your GS1 paper under the theme of important geophysical phenomena. So let's first try to understand what is a cyclone. As per the definition given by National Disaster Management Authority, a cyclone is basically a large air circulation system which is formed around a low pressure area, and it is characterized by violent storms and bad weather conditions which can have devastating effects on humanity. Now, as per US NOAA, there exist two major types of cyclones, the first being a temperate cyclone or an extratropical cyclone. These extratropical cyclones are formed above and below the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, majorly around 35 to 60 degree north and south of equator. Now, these extratropical cyclones are formed due to the meeting of warm and cold air masses which release a potential energy across a front. Keep this in mind that the effect of these extratropical cyclones are more pronounced in the northern hemisphere due to the temperature contrast which exists in the northern hemisphere due to the large expanse of landmass. In contrast, the tropical cyclones are majorly formed over and above the sea, which are characterized by the inward spiraling of the air around a center called as I, which is a region of low pressure. And this inward spiraling of wind takes place anti-clockwise in northern hemisphere and clockwise in the region of southern hemisphere. These tropical cyclones are known by various names such as typhoon in Western Pacific, hurricane in Atlantic, and willy willies in the region of Australia. So let's first try to understand what are the favorable conditions for the formation of these tropical cyclones. The first and foremost is the requirement of a large sea surface area which has a temperature of higher than 27 degrees Celsius. The reason being that with such high warm temperature, there will exist a high rate of evaporation, which will lead to the moisture which will rise above. And because as we go above in the altitude, the temperature will decline, which is called as adiabatic lapse of rate, which is 6.7 degrees Celsius per 1 kilometer. So with this temperature drop, there will take place heavy condensation. And as this condensation will take place, it will release latent heat which will further warm the air. And thus the air will rise further and further above, because of which there will be creation of low pressure areas. And as we know from the fact that wind travels from a high pressure to low pressure area, there will be intense flow of wind from all directions to fill this pressure gap which has been created. Now this is where the role of Coriolis force comes into play, which creates a cyclonic vortex. Basically, Coriolis force leads to the deflection of the wind due to the rotation of Earth on its axis. And this deflection is towards right in the northern hemisphere and towards left in the southern hemisphere. So because of this deflection, now the air will start circulating around this low pressure area and will start rising above and above over this region of I. Then there is also a requirement of a pre-existing weak low pressure area which can be created through the disturbance of easterly winds or because of the formation of intertropical convergence zone. Then there is a requirement of existence of a small variation in the vertical wind shear, because if there will be high vertical wind shear, then the air mass will be completely uplifted. At the same time, we need an upper divergence above the sea level system, so this rising cold air pulls out and this low pressure area remains in the place. Now, as we have seen for the favorable condition of the tropical cyclone, let's try to understand several major components of the tropical cyclone. The first and foremost is the persistence of a low pressure area called as I. Keep this in mind that this is where the pressure is lowest and the temperature is obviously the warmest, and it can be as warm as more than 10 degrees Celsius above around the surrounding region. Now, just surrounding this eye is the eye wall, which are basically the convection cells, where the wind reaches its maximum velocity and can go up to greater than 250 km/h. From these eye walls, you can see the radiating rain bands coming out of cumulus as well as cumulonimbus clouds. And this is the reason of high intensity of rainfall, which can lead to devastating effects. Now, as we have understood about this major components of tropical cyclones, let's try to solve a prelims question which appeared in the year 2020, where the first statement says that jet streams occur in the northern hemisphere only. But we know that jet streams, which are geostrophic winds, they occur in both southern as well as northern hemisphere. So we can safely remove the first statement. The second statement says that only some cyclones develops an eye. Now this is such a beautifully framed statement because it does not say that only some tropical cyclones develops an eye. Rather, it says that some cyclone develops an eye. As we know that in the case of temperate cyclone, as they are majorly formed over a front where a warm air meets a cold air, many a times there can be absence of any low pressure area or eye. Thus, not all cyclone forms eye. Thus, this statement is correct. The third statement says that the temperature inside the eye of a cyclone is nearly 10 degrees Celsius lesser than the surrounding. But as we have already read, it is actually 10 degrees Celsius warmer or higher than the surrounding. Thus, only two statement is correct. Now, because these tropical cyclones can have devastating effects such as loss of property, loss of human lives, disruption of important communication channels, and also as India has more than 7,500 km long coastline, the tropical cyclones becomes a major issue of concern for us. Now, as per a recent report, more than 85 tropical storms which occurs annually, more than half of them, almost 45, actually intensifies into cyclone. Then the Western Pacific Ocean is the most active region where 1/3 of the world's tropical cyclone actually occurs. In contrast to that, the North Indian Basin contributes only to 4% of the global total, yet it remains one of the most vulnerable regions affected by the tropical cyclones. Now, as we know that the global warming is taking place, the sea surface temperature has risen by more than 1.1 degrees Celsius. And as per the report, for every degree of warming, an increase in wind speed of 12% is observed, which actually increases the damage potential by 40%. At the same time, we are also observing the poleward shift of tropical cyclone into the poleward regions because the sea surface temperature is rising. Thus, the adequate conditions are also prevailing in the colder waters where the tropical cyclones do not used to occur earlier. At the same time, the tropical cyclone's lifetime has been significantly increased as well. For example, there was a tropical cyclone named as Freddy, which occurred in the southern Indian Ocean in 2023. which had a recorded lifetime of 37 days, thus making it the longest lived cyclone ever recorded. Thus, because of the intensification of tropical cyclones due to the rising global warming and sea surface temperature, there has arisen the need of a sixth category of classification of tropical cyclones. Currently, the tropical cyclone's intensity is characterized by SS hurricane wind scale or Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, which act as a metric for warning the public about the danger of the tropical cyclones, where we measure the wind scale as the maximum sustained wind speed at the height of 10 meters. And on that basis, we have characterized the tropical cyclones into 5 categories depending upon their various wind speed and the associated damage potential. Now, till now, the highest category is the 5th category, where the speed is assumed to reach 25 km per hour to 309 km per hour. But as per the report, the 5 storms which has occurred in the last 9 years has exceeded the wind speed of even 309 km per hour. Thus, leading to the need of a 6th category classification. Though, as per the report, there is a good news for India that at present, the North Indian Ocean is not very vulnerable to the category 6 storms. But at the same time, with the increasing impact of global warming, it is imperative for our country to revisit our disaster management strategy as well as to strengthen our early warning systems. Keep this information very dear for both your prelims and mains, and we move forward to the next news of the day. A symposium on rights of indigenous people has put the spotlight on the issues related to the implementation of KUNMING Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was adopted in December 2022. This Global Diversity Framework forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of environment conservation. So let's first try to understand the key targets under this Global Biodiversity Framework, which actually aims to supplement the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030 to achieve the vision of people living in harmony with nature by the year of 2050. This biodiversity framework was adopted at the 15th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, where there has been set up 4 important goals to be achieved by 2050 and 23 important targets to be achieved by the year of 2030. Some major targets are such as the 30 into 30 target, where the parties to the convention aims to restore 30% of the degraded ecosystems globally by the year of 2030 and to further conserve 30% of terrestrial, inland water, coastal as well as marine ecosystem by the year of 2030. Thus, basically bringing more areas into the dimensions of national park, wildlife sanctuaries, Ramsar sites, etc. Currently, such protected areas around the world stand at 16%. And we have to increase it further to 30% by the year of 2030. Then it also aims to stop the extinction of known species by the year of 2050, to reduce the risk from pesticides by 50% by the year of 2030, and further to reduce the pollution risk as well as the global footprint of consumption. Now, keep two important things in mind related to the KUNMING Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The first and foremost is that it is not a legally binding treaty on the parties. The second is that it does also not set up any uniform system to regulate that when the countries are going to step up to achieve the targets. However, the environmentalist has raised several concerns associated with this global biodiversity framework, where they have claimed that such protection or increasing the protected areas in the country will ultimately benefit the corporations over the indigenous communities, where such private corporation aims to utilize such protected areas for profit generation and look at these resources over the cost of the indigenous communities who are living there for years and decades. There are several examples to this as well. The first is the Ujung Kulon National Park, which is in Indonesia, as shown in the map here, where the indigenous communities living in this national park lacks right to electricity, education, health, etc. Also, there was a recent case which happened in the Beng Per Wildlife Sanctuary in the region of Cambodia, where a tribal person who is traditionally residing in a particular national park, that is Beng Per Wildlife Sanctuary, that person was actually convicted for doing cultivation inside the protected area. Also, such concerns has been raised for India as well, such as the enactment of Forest Conservation Act of 2023 has actually led to the corporatization of the protected areas, as it has provided for the opening of zoo, safari as well as ecotourism facilities by the private corporations. Keep this in mind that very recently, under the judgment by the Supreme Court held that any such new proposal for opening of zoo or safari will actually require the prior approval of Supreme Court. At the same time, the Supreme Court also directed the central government to include the forest as per the definition held in the T.N. Godvarman case of 1996. Thus, to safeguard the 28% of the forest cover which was actually left out of the ambit of this Forest Conservation Act of 2023. Then the 84% of the national parks in our country, or 89 out of 106 national parks, are actually inhabited by the indigenous people. Thus, if we are going to further increase the protected areas, it is actually going to hamper the rights of the indigenous tribes which are residing in these forests and national parks for centuries and generations, because any kind of human activity is strictly prohibited inside such protected areas. And such projection is not based upon mere assumptions, as we have got several examples to supplement our claims. For example, to convert the Kumbhalgarh Wildlife Sanctuary into a tiger reserve, which is in the state of Rajasthan, it will actually lead to the destruction of 162 tribal villages. Similarly, the expansion of Naura Dehi Wildlife Sanctuary in Madhya Pradesh, which was selected as the site for the reintroduction of cheetahs, it can lead to the destruction of 62 villages within the vicinity of the Naura Dehi Wildlife Sanctuary. And a similar event happened in the Barag Bhuban Wildlife Sanctuary in Assam, where after the site was declared as a protected area, it actually led to the disruption of the rights of the indigenous tribe such as Khasis and Dimasas, etc. Thus, the environmentalists have suggested several steps which shall be taken while we are going to implement the KUNMING Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The first and foremost is to recognize the right of traditional forest dwellers under the Forest Right Act of 2006 and to further provide them with autonomous power of self-governance under the Panchayati Raj Extension of Scheduled Area Act 1996. Then we can recognize their role as the guardian of the forest, as can be seen from the concept of sacred groves which are present across the country, such as the sacred groves of Khasis and Jaintias in the state of Meghalaya. Then we can also create such protected areas outside the ambit of tribal areas. And as the government shall aim to protect the human right violations from happening and to provide these tribal people, traditional forest dwellers, their right under Article 21 of the Constitution, which provides them equal right to dignified life. With these noble suggestions, we move forward to the next news of the day. A headline story talks about the inception of direct elections in India by the introduction of Montagu-Chelmsford reforms which took place in the year of 1919. This introduction of direct election in our country forms an important component of your GS1 paper under the theme of modern Indian history and the significant events which took place. So let's try to trace the origin of election journey in our country. Well, while addressing a public ceremony, our Prime Minister said that India is the mother of democracy. The claim does not lie far away from reality, as we can see as early as Rig Vedic age, which according to the historian Max Muller lasted from 1500 to 1000 BC. We hear about political assemblies such as Sabha and Samiti, where as per the historian's interpretation, the election for the tribal head or Rajan used to take place. However, the written records of such elections taking place comes from the Uttara Merur inscription of Parantaka Chola, whose reign was from 907 to 953 C. The Uttara Merur currently lies in the Kanchipuram district, which is 90 km southeast of Chennai. The inscription provides us details of the process of elections, the qualifications of the candidates, as well as the responsibilities of the elected representatives. At the same time, it also provides for a provision which shall be incorporated in today's time, and that is disqualification of the elected representative if the person take participation in any kind of theft or corruption. However, keep this in mind that such Gram Sabha elections taking place were eventually under the larger reign of kings or monarchs such as Parantaka. Thus, the modern concept of electoral democracy, where we elect our representatives or lawmakers by casting our votes, is started originating in our country with the arrival of the Britishers. It was the year of 1857 and the revolt had shook the conscience of the Britishers. The revolt of 1857, which has been termed as the first war of independence by the V.D. Savarkar. Thus, under the Indian Council Act of 1861, for the first time, the Britishers provided for the inclusion of Indians in the Viceroy's Executive Council. And the first three Indians as such nominated by the Viceroy were Sir Dinkar Rao, Maharaja of Patiala, as well as Maharaja of Banaras. Then such provision of nomination of members or indirect election was further expanded under the Indian Council Act of 1892. Which provided that there will be certain non-official members who will be appointed in the central as well as provincial legislative councils. In the central legislative councils, they will be nominated by the Viceroy on the recommendation of Provincial Legislative Council or the Bengal's Chamber of Commerce. In the provincial legislative councils, these members will be nominated by the governor of that province on the recommendation of university boards, trade boards, chamber of commerce, zamindars, etc. Thus, as we have seen that till the year of 1892, there was only the provision of indirect election or nomination by Viceroy and the governor. The Morley-Minto reforms of 1909 further expanded this principle of indirect election by providing representation to Chamber of Commerce, zamindars, trade boards, universities, etc. And at the same time, it introduced communal representation by providing for separate electorate for Muslims, which meant that the Muslim non-official members will now be elected only by the Muslim voters. Finally, there were several criticisms of the Morley-Minto reforms, which led eventually to the Montague-Chelmsford reforms of 1919. The Montague, who was the Secretary of State, and the Chelmsford, who was the then Viceroy. The act known as Indian Council Act of 1919 provided for a national legislature with two houses. The first was an upper house or the Council of States, which eventually took the shape of Rajya Sabha of today. And then there was a lower house or a legislative assembly which shaped into the current Lok Sabha. In both the houses, the majority of the members were now to be elected by the direct elections. However, keep this in mind that it did not mean that the whole of India was going to vote for their representatives. Rather, there was a limited electoral franchise which was based upon property qualification, the amount of taxes being paid by the individual, or the education level, etc. At the same time, whether a woman can contest election or can vote in the election was given to the state legislative assemblies to decide for, and they eventually provided for that provision. Thus, women could also eventually vote and also contest elections. Also, it further increased the communal representations by expanding the separate electorate provision to Sikhs, Anglo-Indians, as well as Indian Christians. Then finally, there was an election law which was made in the year of 1920 when the first elections actually took place, which provided for the criminalization of threat or bribery during the election, which has been incorporated in the Indian Penal Code of 1860 and still applies. Now, in this context, the saying of the catalyst of this election, Montague, holds very dear to us as the 18th Lok Sabha elections are around the corner, where he said that the honest education of the electoral franchise or the voters is utmost important for the India in the future, to make sure that the Indians shall not vote on racial or religious prejudices. We will keep this thought in our head and will move forward to the last news of the day. In a recent judgment, Supreme Court held that anticipatory bail is an extraordinary power and it shall not become a norm. Thus, the concept of anticipatory bail becomes very important for your upcoming prelims examination under the theme of polity and governance. So, let's first try to understand what is a bail. Bail is basically a statutory right provided to an accused where he can ask the court for a conditional release if the judgment has not yet been pronounced, on a condition that if such requirement will occur, the accused will reappear in the front of the court. Thus, bail acts as a kind of a security deposit which has been deposited by the accused to the court on a conditional release. The provisions of the bail are regulated under section 436 to 439 of Criminal Procedure Code. The principles of this bail has been laid down under the A.K. Rai Chaudhary case of 1973, under which there are several kind of bails which is provided by the law system of our country. The first and foremost being the regular bail, which is directed under section 437 to 439 of the CRPC, where the court directs the police, if it is in a police custody or in judicial custody, to release the accused under the arrest. Then there is an anticipatory bail which is directed by the section 438 of CRPC, where the accused apply for the bail before being arrested, and such special bail can only be provided either by the session court or by the high court. Then there is an interim bail or a kind of a short-term relief which is sought by the accused when he has already applied for anticipatory bail or regular bail, but that such application is pending in the court. Then there is a statutory bail under section 167 of CRPC, which basically is a kind of a right which is accrued to the accused if the police fails to complete the investigation within the specified period. What is such a specified period? Such a specified period in normal cases can be 60 days. But if the case deals with crimes which can lead to life imprisonment or imprisonment up to 10 years, then such investigation can extend up to 90 days as well. Is this the maximum period? No, because there are several special acts such as Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1961 or NADPS Act of 1985, under which such investigation can also extend up to 180 days. Now, in the original CRPC of 1898, it did not had any such provision for anticipatory bail under the section 438. But by the recommendation of the Law Commission of India on September 1969, finally the provisions for anticipatory bail was incorporated as an antidote to the detention in false cases. Thus, there are several important judicial interpretations related to the bail provisions. The first and foremost is the famous Gurbaksh Singh case of 1980, where the court held that section 438 or anticipatory bail shall be interpreted in the light of Article 21, which protects the right to dignified life of an individual. Thus, it laid down that bail shall be the rule and jail shall be an exception. This was also upheld by the Supreme Court in Sushila Agrawal case of 2020. However, recently the Supreme Court has taken a different interpretations where it has said, while dealing with the cases related to the Prevention of Witch Practices Act of 1919, that such anticipatory bail may be rule in many cases, but it shall not become a norm, especially if there are several cases which are related to the violation of the rights of women or crime committed against women. Then in such heinous cases, such anticipatory bail shall not become a norm. With this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.